beginning with a intellectual, philosophical inquiry into the why and wherefore of the world or the origin of the world and so on. It applies itself to a life situation. And therefore it eminently answers certain difficulties of modern mind. In fact, it's an answer to the modern condition in which people cannot give up action, and if they really want to have an aspiration satisfied, well, Gita is the one scripture that actually points out how, without an external renunciation of life, it is quite possible to attain higher spiritual status. And that is the greatest good which Gita can do if it is properly understood and followed. The question is not merely to know the philosophy or outlook of Gita in a difficult situation in life, but to apply it in one's own life. That is the whole point. And it could be applied because, as we talked yesterday, it points out a gradation, a hierarchy, a so to say ladder of movement from life to something greater than life, and then how to bring down that light into life again. A double movement of ascent and a movement of descent from above. Now, there are also cognate questions which are related with many standpoints of the Gita, and one of them is violence and non-violence. There are people who have tried to interpret the Gita symbolically by saying that the fight in the Gita was really a fight which was not an actual battlefield, but a symbolic representation of an inner fight with the powers of ignorance or powers of darkness and light and so on. It is not an impossible explanation, but it would be very difficult to square it with the whole teaching of the Gita taken as a whole. You can take parts, isolated passages, and perhaps come to that conclusion, but taken as a whole, it would be very difficult to put absolute and idealistic non-violence into the scheme of the Gita. Because Gita actually admits the present human nature as a basis on which any work has to be done. And in the present constitution of man's nature, absolute non-violence is very difficult to observe, you see. And secondly, that which is now called violence is not necessarily violence, because violence would require a special definition. If one opposes an evil or a wrongdoing or injustice, by all the force at his command, it is very difficult to call it violence. In a case where he actually sees injustice being perpetrated and he puts in all his force to prevent injustice, I don't know by what stretch of definition we can call it violence. You see, the habit of human mind is to accustom itself to like certain ideas, and when we are talking about subject, well, one puts a self-complacent attitude. You see, a man who himself is not going to follow violence or non-violence will, when he talks or argues, will always say, no, but non-violence is wonderful and perfect and it should be observed, without knowing what non-violence really means and what violence really means. You understand? He doesn't know what is violence. In fact, by saying that he is trying to stand up for non-violence, he almost wants a justification, and almost in advance he is on the right. You see, by dubbing and using a term which is absolutely vague and not clear at all, well, he tries to say that you are standing for violence, I am standing for non-violence. Now, I don't think the question is as simple as all that. It involves the very constitution of human nature. Not only human nature, but the whole nature. You have to see, when a tiger kills a deer, is he violent? That's it. Then you say, no, he is not violent, he is seeking his food. He is taking what he must eat, otherwise tiger must die. That's all. So then, tendencies in nature exist in which life lives upon life. Without any psychological reaction or psychological operation, purely physical need makes an animal behave in a way which we will call cruelty, perhaps, or violence. Well, now, if this tendency is there in nature, well, it comes because whole is a process of evolution. We have studied in Life Divine that the process of from the inconscient to a greater and greater or rising degree of consciousness. The progress is to rise from inconscience to one petal, second petal, third petal, fourth petal. Gradually, the whole universal energy is unfolding more and more petals of light, so to say, on the way from darkness of the inconscient to a possible light. So in that growth, whatever was there in the inconscient is being pulled. It is not being left behind. Inconscience and its inertia is being left behind. But the quality of what was the inertia is being taken into life. So when life is embodied in a physical body, the body represents the inertia of the material being. Well, in the same way, when mind has emerged in man, man's physical body and his brain represent the break on his mind and life both. So that matter pursues, you see, the growth of the growing light towards a greater and greater degree of unfolding knowledge or unfolding light. And in that, when human being comes to have his mind and conscience, well, the same tendency that we see in the animal kingdom persists. So many common characteristics of animal life pass into the human being. In fact, man is more than half animal. More than half of man's constitution is composed of animal tendencies, which is so patent and open. That's why in Sanskrit there is a verse which says eating, drinking, sleeping, reproduction, fear of life and all that are common characteristics between animal and man, one verse says. It is a sense of right and wrong, sense of true and false, that distinguishes the human being from the animal kingdom. Now, it is that which brings the problem of violence and non-violence to the front. Otherwise, man is an animal, and as an animal he hunted, he killed the prey for his food, is it not, in the beginning? Well, at that time there was no sense of violence in him, because the conscience had not awakened. Now when the conscience and mind have awakened, one has to see how far to allow this law of mutual destruction in life to operate in human life. That is all the problem. Problem is not violence or non-violence. Problem is that there is the law of life living on life. And how far should it be allowed to work in human life? Even if you obviate strife for human life, non-violence will not be ideally attained, because man will be taking food, and when he is taking food, he is taking life. So that ideal observance of non-violence is a practical impossibility. Practically, it's an impossibility, and the limits are defined in Jain religion, which is one of the oldest religions of the world, coexistent with Buddhism. See, Mahavir existed he was contemporary of Gautam Buddha, and he organized this group based on sanctity of life or sacredness of life. All life is sacred. That's the basis on which the whole Jain religion is founded. And well, even they who are very particular and have devised almost, unimaginable methods of trying to preserve and help life, but even they had to admit limitations in their application of the law of sacredness of life. And the latest exponent of this great doctrine himself, not only that, in a way, a certain way, embodiment of the principle of ahimsa, non-violence, a divine quality, even he had to admit on more than half a dozen occasions the limitations of this, this law as applied to life, individual and social. There are cases in which, for instance, Kashmir, he had to ask the India government to send the army to defend Kashmir. You see, and in the Ashram agricultural, production department, he had to ask the guardians to keep off the animals, the monkeys and the birds and the cows and the bulls. You see, if you don't do it, then you don't do agriculture either one way or the other. Well, I am pointing out practical difficulties. Not that it's not desirable. Everybody wants, if he can avoid, being hard to anyone or resistance or opposition. But if there is something that stands up, I don't know how to meet it otherwise. That is one of the points in the Gita, which Gita makes it very clear that it is possible to attain an inner poise in which You are founded on a spiritual truth and spiritual realization, and you allow your nature to participate in a movement which to the outer view appears as if you are resorting to conflict and battle. But you are not at all resorting to conflict and battle from your own inmost poise, because you are poised in the divine consciousness which dictates to you the necessity of what is to be done under certain conditions of life in which you happen to be either locked or connected or happen to be active. It can't help. Arjun is actually on the battlefield and he is struck with this remorse, a conflict between two values, whether he should destroy his cousins, which will destruction of one's own family, or whether he should observe the law of the Kshatriya fighting for the right. And they were standing up for the right because they were being deprived of the legitimate share of the kingdom which belonged to them. So, you see, between the two, he was indecisive. And there to put a spiritual or any symbolic interpretation is practically impossible. With common sense, it is impossible to put any spiritual communication, spiritual interpretation, or say that it is a symbol. You see, a fight with battle between powers of light and powers of darkness. That's not possible. It's an actual army that is standing in front, and situation is in the Mahabharata, the epic of India. So that's a historical situation. Very difficult to turn it into a pure symbol, I mean, in which no actual battle might have taken place. No, it is a battlefield. And Krishna, at the end of all the teaching of 18 chapters, well, the last order given to him is therefore you have to fight. So the conclusion is there indubitable. There is no doubt about the last conclusion. And the spirit in which he is made to fight is here given in words of Sri Aurobindo from the Essays on the Gita. It is the creed of the Aryan fighter. What is the creed? Know God, says the Gita. Know thyself. Help men. Protect the right. Do without fear or weakness or faltering thy work of battle in the world. Thou art the eternal and the imperishable spirit. Thy soul is here in its upward paths to immortality. Life and death are nothing. Sorrow and wounds and suffering are nothing. For these things have to be conquered and overcome. Look not at thy own pleasure, gain and profit, but above and around, above at the shining summits which thou climbest, around at the world of battle and trial, in which good and evil, progress and retrogression are locked in stern conflict. Men call thee their strong man, their hero for help. Help then and fight. Destroy when by destruction the world must advance. But hate not that which thou destroyest, neither grieve for all those who perish. Know everywhere the one self. Know all to be immortal souls, and body to be but dust. Do thy work with a calm, strong, and equal spirit. Fight and fall nobly, or conquer mightily. For this is the work that God and thy nature have given to thee to accomplish. That gives you some idea of how the Gita looks at this problem, you see, of what people have been trying to put into various lines of argumentation. There is no question of desirability of non-violence being an ideal which man must reach someday. There is no question. We are discussing it in the ideal of human unity, where abolition of war, as he says, it cannot be accomplished unless national armaments are accomplished. It's not. Yes, so there it is. It is a problem. And in actual carrying out the problem, there are limitations of the present condition of human nature and of situation which have to be considered. Now, Gita has posited, as we said, two natures. Up till now, means till the Gita came to the front, it was supposed that human nature is human nature and there is no other possible nature except perhaps you go down in the scale and then you meet to the brute nature or the animal nature, you see. Now this animal nature being given human nature was supposed to be constant and unvarying. Human nature is human nature. Gita for the first time brings this idea prominently into front, that there are two natures operative in the world. One nature is not actually dynamically seen by us, but it is potential to man. We can see the operation of that nature if we turn our eye to the external world first, where the Gita describes the vibhutis, the special power of the Supreme manifesting itself in objects of nature, in preeminent manifestations of life. Wherever you find that is a manifestation of the Supreme in one of his aspects there in nature. But as organized, the divine nature is first seen by man in human beings who embody in them an extraordinary degree of some element of human perfection which to their view seems to surpass the human limit. You see? For instance, if you take non-violence for the matter of that. Now, if you see generally that people do observe non-violence as far as they can. I mean, they don't want to go out and fly at anybody for nothing. But generally, they like to be good to each other. I mean, association, love, and mutual regard or cooperation is as powerful perhaps as conflict, if not more powerful in many cases. In fact, it is one of the most powerful and constructive forces of the world. Cooperation, sympathy, regard for each other, or mutual relationship or interchange. It has played a greater part in forming human history positively than conflict. Conflict also have contributed. I don't say that conflict was bad all along. Conflict sometimes was very good. Very good in the sense when you see retrospectively at the result. These great facts of human history are not to be judged by their immediate appearance. You see, people have an idea that their judgment of the outer appearance is the real judgment of the value of the event, which is not true. And I gave you the instance of French Revolution, if you remember, that when French Revolution actually took place, there were every day 400 to 500 people guillotined in Paris. This is history and authentic history, and it has not happened in the legendary past. This is a man living at that time in Paris sees what is apparent. He only sees what is apparent. He sees that 500 people, most of them innocent perhaps, because they belong to Girondins or the other party and so on. Jacobins, who are they? Well, if one party came to power for 1 week, they went on electing the other party. When the other party came to power, they with the other side. Well, naturally, the man who lived at that time thought it was the worst period of life, and it was hell, as they say. I think it is Dickens who writes in Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times and it was the worst of times. Some people thought it was best of times and some thought it was worst of times. This is a way of looking because they look at the outer appearance. But you go back 100 years forward after the revolution and then you see that it is this great phenomenon of collective life of man that gave three great truths to the collective life of modern, constitutional life. Liberty, equality, fraternity. But for French Revolution, they would not have found a place in human history as quickly, at least, as they did. You see, it took a long time. This liberty, democracy was not immediately accepted, even in Europe, as we studied in the ideal of human unity. Central Europe and Russia, and they were not at all till almost a century back. So immediately French Revolution did not carry out everything, but it gave an ideal which molded the constitution of so many nations. All the kings toppled down. There is no king now. At the time when French Revolution took place, how many kings were there? You will just see. Monarchy very often immediately limited, and even limited monarchy and very often had to go. Well, the law, rule of the law, and constitution of the common man, equality of man before law, all those things only came after the wake of French Revolution. You see, Code Napoleonic is the first code that was organized after feudal times in Europe. Before that, there was no law before which all were equal. There were laws for each class, and The aristocrats had different laws from the common man, and common man was certainly victim of many what we call injustices. And even now that has not completely stopped. But acceptance of these on universal or international scale was a result of French Revolution. It's a service to the collective life of man. French Revolution has contributed to the progress of man's collective idealism by putting before man the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Well, the cruel aspect of it is one which is secondary and one nobody says it is unreal or untrue or it didn't exist. But you have to see from far. So the action is not to be judged by its immediate appearance. No, we were talking about higher nature. We were talking about that. Now, it is conceivable that a man is observing non-violence and people are good. The subject came up on the topic of conflict versus association, sympathy, and meeting between people. Now, in modern times, if you take non-violence even as a sample, you take Gandhi, then Mahatma Gandhi will stand out as an outstanding example of a man who embodied the principle of non-violence to a superhuman degree. There will be nothing wrong in that judgment because ordinary man, when he is non-violent, well, he avoids a fight, he is passive, he can allow the injustice to pass, without any violent contradiction. But to go to the extent to which Mahatma went in his attitude of non-violence, when the Pathan was brought to him when he was injured, in South Africa, he was victimized. He was beaten by a Mohammedan hireling, you see, and he was wounded and he became unconscious. And then when he regained consciousness and he was in hospital, the man was brought because the police immediately caught hold of him. And he said, I don't want to proceed against him. Now this shows a degree of the effort and attainment to the principle of non-violence. And you say, oh yes, of course, not only is he a great man, but he is a vibhuti of non-violence. Vibhuti means the extent of quality of non-violence is more than human. It is divine. He embodies the divine quality of non-violence for modern times. There will be nothing wrong to say that, because that is really a fact. Or there is another instance in Indian epic of a man who was generous, a tendency to give. Now, there are many people who can't stand any poverty in sight. Even in poor India, there are people who feel very much and immediately they part with whatever they have or whatever they can. And there are people in whose life this has become a great value, donation and charity. Relieve poverty and suffering or hunger wherever they can, you see. Now, this is a great idea. And if a man does it ideally, there is one man, I think, in Africa whose name is known as, I forget his name, he was an Arab, I think. I forget his name. He was an Arab who did such a colossal charity that even now the East African coast remembers him. You see? And there was somebody in Saurashtra in India whose name is like that, you see? That so-and-so means charity. That's all. Oh, he was so generous like so-and-so. Well, he became proverbial. Now, there is an instance in Indian mythology, Indian epic, Mahabharata, of Karna. He was one who never turned away anyone from his door. Never. There is a drama Charudatta in which a character is given also in Sanskrit drama, but that's a drama character, this is an epic character. And he was on deathbed, this Karna. And in Indian mythology, they have a way of putting things, you see, as to show the degree of this attainment of the man. So when he was on deathbed, the divine thought, let me test his generosity. So he came as a beggar, they say. You see, he came as a Brahmin. And they said, oh, Karna, they say a way of saying which means I am here to satisfy my need. I mean, I give you blessings, I came to give you blessings. And I'm just arriving. Oh, he said, well, I'm sorry. Yes. Then he said, well, I'm not well and I can't do anything. He says, but this told me that you are the Daneshwari, means the one, the top donor, the top man in charity. Oh, he said, yes. Well, I have nothing else. And he had golden teeth, you see, gold-filled teeth. So he pulled out his teeth and said, well, I'm sorry, but I have nothing else to give just now. This is the only gold that I have with me, and I think that will do for the time being. And then you say, oh, this is more than human. You see, this is a manifestation of charity on a scale which goes beyond the limit of human, excellence or greatness. This is vibhuti. You understand the point? Yes. Now, that is an indication that higher nature is there. An indirect way in which, we can see that when Gita speaks of a higher nature already existing, people don't understand and they say, where is the higher nature? Well, it is there operating. When Christ on cross can say, Father, forgive them for they do not know what they do, it is not human. It is certainly superhuman, isn't it? The quality of love and forgiveness which you see there is not human. Human in the sense, the highest reach of it goes beyond. Highest human reach, it is surpassed. Then you see it is vibhuti, it is divine quality. You see? So, when Gita speaks of a divine nature, it's not speaking of an abstract something which we don't know anything about. It is a rare phenomenon in life, but everything rare is only the beginning. Whatever is rare is not merely an exception. It is only indication of the possibility of the future. That's all. This is the one thing which human nature has to learn, that when something extraordinary, wonderful happens, it is not a sign of a miracle only, but a sign of pointing to the future. That's all. Well, that Gita is saying about the higher nature. But by the way, that will come for us again. There is a higher and a supreme and a conscient and a divine nature. And it is that which has become the individual soul or the jiva, the central being in man. The divine nature has become the individualized central being of man. In the lower nature, each being appears as the ego. Now make a distinction. He is pointing out, Gita is pointing out. In the lower nature, ego works. That is a sign of the lower nature. In the higher, he is the divine individual, the Purusha, the self, the true subjective self, not the ego. In other words, multiplicity is part of the spiritual nature of the one, the divine. Multiplicity, to become one, become multiple, many, that is the divine nature. Divine by its very constitution is multiple, infinitely variant, unlimitedly self-determined or capable of an infinite self-determination. And this infinite self-determination comes to us in the higher nature as individual. In the lower nature is ego. In the lower nature, this very self-determination of the Supreme, which is the central being, comes and man experiences it as ego. Well, here. In other words, multiplicity is part of spiritual nature of the one, the Supreme Divine. And this individual soul is myself, says the divine in the Gita. In the Gita, the word is put in the mouth of Krishna, who is the divine incarnation. Therefore, Krishna says, this individual soul is myself. In the creation, it's a partial manifestation of me. Mamaivangshaha. Amsha means portion. He is my own portion. Portion is not one separated or isolated being, not mathematical and fraction in the sense of a portion. A portion is representative character. When you say when the human mind is so wedded to its dividing capacity and faculty that whenever you say it's a portion of the divine, say, oh, it is cut off from the divine. Portion is not cut off from the divine. It is like I pointed out to you, a demarcation does not divide. A demarcation does not divide. If you make a demarcation on the plan, on the map of the country is not cut into parts. Yes, there is a multiplicity and yet there is a unity. Yes, you see, well, here It is my portion in the sense that I become that. It is not my portion means I cut something from me and put it from outside, but I become that smallness for some particular purpose. I become that ansha, that limited portion for achieving some particular end. It is not that he is separated from me and now I have nothing to do with him. It's not a potter making a pot. That is an extra cosmic conception of God which does not bring in the real quality of God, which is omnipresence. If God is only a potter who has prepared the universe or world or creation as a pot, he is not in the pot. You see, then where is his omnipotence and omniscience? If he is omniscient, he is everywhere. Omniscience is one whose presence is everywhere. Well, he must be immanent. It cannot be. If by very definition the divine must be immanent. Now here he points out that Ansha, when he says my portion, it doesn't mean that I have divided myself and thrown out a bit of myself, but I have become that for the time being, just as the sun. When you take a glass, you concentrate it on your, what is it called, the centering glass, you know, it is called the, not spectrum, you see which concentrates, yes, magnifying glass, well, concentrate sunlight to a point. Now, that is a portion of the sun. It's not separated from the sun. It is sun here, right? Very much the sun, isn't it? I mean, for a particular purpose, to burn something or to concentrate the rays on a particular point, you concentrate the rays only for that point, that's all. So remember this, because this is an important point, and many people simply go on arguing because they have a mind to go on arguing that, oh, Ansha now is the individual is divided from the Supreme. He is not divided. Gita would insist that it is wrong to say that he is divided. He is the assumption of the divine by an act of knowledge and a self-determination. Nobody has imposed anything on the divine. It is a self-determination. That's the law. Divine nature is that one spontaneously becomes the many, or self-determines itself into infinite multiplicity, and each part of the multiplicity is whole of himself. This is the small thing that one must keep in mind, because otherwise you get such a confusion that out of it is very difficult to get out. Now, he is saying that he is myself, partial manifestation of me in creation, and it possesses all my powers, says the Krishna in the Gita to Arjuna. Yes. It is witness, it is giver of sanction, it is upholder, it is knower, it is the Lord. The one portion that is there in the human being, he is the witness, and we have seen that the practice of realizing this witness self as one part of human psychology, a witness self and a flow of nature, is an important part of spiritual development of yoga, even of karma yoga. He is witness, he is giver of sanction, he is upholder, he is the knower, and he is the Lord. It descends into the lower nature, this very portion, and thinks itself bound by action, so to enjoy the lower being. It can draw back and know itself as the passive Purusha, free from all reactions and actions. It can rise above the three qualities of inertia, activity, and balance, and liberated from the bondage of all action, even as I do myself, and by adoration of the highest supreme divine and union with him, it can enjoy wholly its own divine nature. Now Gita is pointing out the way of ascent, that it is possible for this soul that has descended into the ignorance and become or has been identified with the ego, to withdraw from the ego and realize the witness self of the nature, realize the identity of this self with the Supreme, and to enter the divine nature. Then the divine nature will become active, just as now the lower nature is active. When he has risen to the identity with the divine nature will be active in him. Then he will be able to carry out or fulfill the will of the divine in his life. Because there is a will of the divine in the whole of life, the whole field of life, universal as well as individual, has a divine will operating. It is deformed because it is being received by man through the distortion of his ego and the lower nature of desire and ego and selfishness and greed and ambition and impulses and passions and so on. It is that which distorts the function of the original will. Even throughout all that distortion, the push is there towards the realization of the ultimate truth. It is not as it were divine was being thwarted. No, it is being delayed. Because for truth, they say in India, the time for truth is eternity. So that there is never a hurry in the process of truth. And truth is not permanently thwarted at all. What is thwarted is, well, the immediate fulfillment for man. What doesn't happen is, well, man is losing the chance. Truth is not thwarted permanently at all. That's never the conception, you see. There is no hurry because it is a self-determined process which goes by an inherent, power which is there within itself is bound to reach. Well, how quick, how fast, how much will depend on human being giving it all the possible conveniences for its manifestation or realization in life. You see, the more easily the human being opens, immediate would be the realization of the will. Now, there is one thing which is very finely written on the Gita on all scriptures. Gita refers in context of Arjuna's discussion to the sacred books or scriptures of Indian religion, because people bring out the Veda and the Upanishad and the commands that have been there in the literature as sacred literature, scriptural. And Krishna replies to Arjuna in the context by saying that, this is only a passing scripture and you must not give that importance to it which you seem to give. On that passage in the Gita, where the Gita passes a strong remark against Veda, because people swore by the ceremonials of the Veda, the performance of sacrifice and the doing of certain outer ritual, and said that by that you attain heaven and by that you fulfill yourself and so on, which Gautam Buddha also ridiculed by telling that it was not the outer ritual which would save the man. Gita says that, those people who are very much attached to heaven-going tendency, well, if they want to perform the Vedas ceremonials, it is their business. But I don't consider them to be qualified for truth or for the knowledge. You see, in Indian culture, knowledge is not considered gathering of information. Knowledge is growth of consciousness to a higher stage. Realization or concrete change in the whole psychology is a sign of knowledge. Knowledge is becoming, not knowing, not reading, thinking and information. Knowledge is identity. Knowledge is always by identity. True knowledge, in the Indian sense of the term, is always by identity. It is not by ratiocination, experiment, thinking, or reading and so on. That is the secondary process, and that is relegated to partial knowledge or relative knowledge. It's not called knowledge. It's called avidya. Means not true vidya, not true knowledge. This is informational part, development of mind, emotion, and so on. But true development and true knowledge is by identity, oneness with the object of knowledge. Then you know. Otherwise, you think or you have a mental construction about what your mind tells you, but not about what is, but what the mind tells about what is. You see? Yes. Now, here he deals with this scripture and the place, and Sri Aurobindo puts the remark further. He elucidates. You see, as he says in the Gita, is the most brilliant exposition of the teachings of the Gita, philosophical as well as the practical side. There is no book on Gita which can give you in such a small compass a clear philosophical exposition and a practical way of practicing the karma yoga of the Gita. It's a most marvelous contribution in that respect because the double purpose is fulfilled most effectively and clearly by Sri Aurobindo in this essays on the Gita. It is from that I'm reading. The Gita in later chapters speaks highly of the Veda and the Upanishads. It says that, oh, whatever knowledge is there, I know, and I am the knowledge. That's how the incarnation speaks in the later chapters. But in the first chapters, Gita, ridicules the Vedic people who propose to reach heaven by sacrifices and by ceremonials. They are divine scriptures. They are the word, the divine word. Still, the letter of the scripture binds and confuses, as the apostle of Christianity warned his disciples when he said that the letter killeth, and it is the spirit that saves. And there is a point beyond which the utility of the scripture itself ceases. This is very good to bear in mind because it's a great lesson of the Gita. And there is a point beyond which the utility of the scripture itself ceases. This is very good to bear in mind because it's a great lesson of the Gita. Gita is the one scripture that says that scriptural authority has a limitation to be admitted. You see, a point beyond which the utility of scripture itself ceases. The real source of knowledge is the Lord within the heart. I am seated in the heart, he quotes Gita, of every man, and from me is knowledge, says the Gita. The scripture is only the verbal form of that inner Veda, of the self-luminous reality. It is the Shabda Brahma, the infinite in the form of the word. The mantra, says the Veda, has risen from the heart. This is from the Vedic hymn. From the secret place where the seat of truth, in the cave of the heart, the seat of the truth is situated. That origin is its sanction. The sanction of the scripture is the origin of the scripture from the Lord in the heart. But still, even when it is so, the infinite truth is greater than its word. The infinite truth is greater than his word. And in the Savitri, he says, truth is always greater than her forms. There is a form in which truth expresses, manifests, or is seen, either an artistic form, poetic form, or religious, or a word, linguistic. Nor shall you say, Sri Aurobindo proceeds, of any scripture that it alone is all sufficient, and no other truth can be admitted. As the Vedavadins, those who hold up the authorities of the Veda to go to heaven, said of the Veda, this is a saving and liberating word that must be applied to all scriptures of the world. Gita applies it to Veda. He says this must be applied to all the scriptures of the world. Take all the scriptures, says Sri Aurobindo now, take all the scriptures that are or have been, Bible, Quran, and the books of the Chinese, the Veda, the Upanishads, the Purana and the Tantra and the Shastra and the Gita itself, and the saying of the thinkers and sages, prophets and the avatars, the incarnations, still you shall not say that there is nothing else, or that the truth that your intellect cannot find there is not true because you cannot find it there. Heard or unheard before, that always is the truth which is seen by the heart of man in his illumined depths, or heard within from the master of all knowledge, the knower of the eternal Veda. That is the sanction of true scriptures. See? This refers to certain aspect of yoga, practice of yoga. Gita advocates very strongly and almost exclusively the path of karma yoga, which is integration or synthesis of knowledge and devotion. Gita is not exclusively devoted to one path. Gita takes all the three chief faculties of human psychology, intellect, the emotions, and the will. And three are taken together by Gita in the practice of its yoga, which mainly stresses the importance of karma yoga, the willpower. But it also takes the knowledge aspect and the emotional aspect of devotion with it, so that it is not merely dry action, but action which is charged with knowledge, illumined by knowledge, and also is suffused by the spirit of devotion and self-surrender to the divine. These three faculties of man are the chief powers of human psychology: intellect, emotion, and willpower. And Gita takes all the three in a synthesis, mainly stressing the karma, because karma is unavoidable, as we told yesterday and day before and still day before, that karma forms 3/4 of the part of man. He cannot give it up in a scheme of spiritual development. If true spiritual development is to come to man, action and work must find a place in it. And it is Gita, the one scripture that lays a very strong stress on acceptance of work and action as an indispensable part of spiritual growth. In fact, it says that all other spiritual attainment would not be really, true or applicable and strong till they are suffused by the spirit of action, till they come down to the world of action. So it is this yoga which is synthetic and taking the knowledge aspect, the action aspect, the will aspect, and the bhakti devotional aspect, which is an integration of the human being complete. It leads one to spiritual fulfillment according to Gita. Now, what is that yoga of karma? On what it is founded? Some elements of the practice of karma yoga, we have already done that more than once. But still, now in the words of the essays in the Gita, it will have a sort of a relevance and a practical, bearing. Because in one place, in the words of essays in the Gita, you get the whole thing, clearly given in few lines. It is non-attachment. The yoga of Gita first begins by, it is non-attachment. It is to do works without clinging with the mind to objects of sense and to the fruit of the works. It is not inaction, because it would be an error, a confusion, and a self-delusion, because it's an impossibility not to do action. That one verse of the Gita is very positive. Nahi kaschit kshanamapi jatu tishthatya karma krut. Nothing in the world can remain even for a moment without acting. Nothing in the world can remain, nothing in the world which for a moment can remain without action. Because want of action also would be an action. You see, when you withdraw yourself from action, it is an action. It's an act of your will by which you have to withdraw. See, when a man doesn't seem to act, he is all the time probably active. You see a strong reservoir of water on the top of the hill, it doesn't show any sign of action, but it's exerting tremendous pressure, you see. And you can feel it when you put a tube, then you know that it can turn a turbine and give you kilowatts of electricity. So that because it doesn't act, it doesn't mean there is no energy or force or power at work. It is perhaps acting. So, but action which is full and freely done, without subjection to sense and to passion, desireless and unattached works are the first secret of perfection in Karma Yoga. 1. Desireless action and unattached works. For knowledge does not mean renunciation of works. There is a tradition in India that if you have really got knowledge, well, you will immediately find futility of action. This is one of the traditional influences of monistic outlook. Shankar's outlook on Indian mind has promoted this view that men of action, should have nothing, men of knowledge should have nothing to do with action. Because immediately he acts well, he falls from his knowledge. And the argument here given is just the opposite. And Sri Aurobindo pointed out very nicely this thing in some of his other writings also, that to say that action is invariable bondage or a cause of fall is to say that you have not attained spiritual perfection. That would be a sign that you are not attained, because the divine acts in the world, and divine doesn't necessarily fall from his divine status. And if you identify yourself with the divine, then a similar quality must come to you. You must attain that quality of accepting action without falling from your spiritual status. Well, that is necessary and that is indispensable. I don't understand why all action should be necessarily a fall from the higher spiritual status. Because man ordinarily in his egoistic nature or lower nature, well, is always running around the groove of desires and ego. People think that all action must be only of that type. But there is action and action. That's what we have discussed several times in our talk, that the action is not to be judged by its outer appearance. Action is to be judged by the motive or the psychological force from which it proceeds. Action can never be judged by the outer size, otherwise one is always deceived. And in fact, I showed also that the bigger the size of action or the large scale on which the action is being carried out, well, the greater is the proportion of ego and ambition at work. And spiritually, it is a very small value, though externally it may have a very great importance for human life. It may have great practical importance somewhere, nobody doubts that. But spiritually, the work has no great value. It is utility, yes, it is good. Nobody says it is bad, but it's not great action because it is a great proportion. And people always say this scheme and this plan costs so many million rupees or so many dollars and so on. Well, it's all right. It doesn't make the work spiritually great. It makes a material achievement, scientific progress, and collective effort, and very fine elements there. All right, but spiritually, it is ordinary utility. It's just like feeding somebody who is needy. You say society has a need, you fulfill it by doing something which will fill the need of society. It is not more than that. You cannot compare it with a man conquering his selfishness and ego and desire. Certainly not. A man who is self-controlled and putting his mind quiet, or putting his egoism out of his consciousness, or conquering his desire, certainly the action is far greater spiritually. It is not externally great, but it is the inner thing that the value comes from where it proceeds. Knowledge does not mean renunciation of works. It means equality of temperament, non-attachment to desire and objects of sense. And it means a poise of the intelligence, will in the soul, free, high uplifted above the lower instrumentation of Prakriti. The Gita speaks of work that must be done, the work that you must do. Now, normally when they write a commentary on the Gita, now everybody, without much erudition or practice of yoga, begins to write because Gita is an attractive book and it gives so much food for thinking. And then immediately one man reads it for 6 months or 1 year, he thinks he must write something about Gita. And it's all right, it makes the subject more studied and brings various aspects into front, but very little profundity is there because Gita requires a life. If you want really to study Gita and say something worth saying, well, it is a man like Aurobindo who can say something. He has spent 40 years on that purpose or on that subject. Well, when he says it is worth hearing, but when everybody writes and then they write about Gita, that work that must be done, and then he says that's a performance of duty. That you must perform your duty disinterestedly. Gita is not saying that. Not at all. But people write. You can't prevent them from having a partial or wrong interpretation. They say it is disinterested performance of duty is what Gita says. Gita would not have taken 18 chapters to say such a trite thing because anybody could say that. It doesn't require spiritual depth or knowledge to say that disinterested performance of duty is the highest reach of Karma Yogi. I was staggered when I read that, but I have written about half a dozen books saying that. This is interpreted as work that has to be done as a rule of social duty, and this fixed social duty performed disinterestedly and without any personal object. This is how Gita's doctrine of desireless work is often interpreted. See, I don't know write this, you see. But it seems to me that Gita's teaching is not so crude and so simple not so local and temporal and narrow as all that. It is large, free, subtle and profound. It is for all time, for all men, and not for a particular age and a particular country. Therefore, it is not for disinterested performance of duty, but rising into a spiritual status where one realizes his true self as the divine and then raises himself to a status of equality and acts from equality in the world without desire for the fruit of action. You see? And does that action or carries out that activity in his life which is brought forward in his nature by universal nature, by absolutely something impersonal. We have read about this sacrifice, is it not? Yes. Now, in Gita, the one idea that was given was that actions, when they are desireless, there will be no motive to do actions. This is one difficulty which people put. The Gita is advocating the performance of desireless action, but how can a man act without desire? Desire is the motive of 9/10 of man's activity, and therefore desire must be there. If desires are not there, action will come to a stop. Then Gita comes out with a remedy. It says that when your vital being and mental being have become desireless, you can still perform the action as a sacrifice, as an offering to the divine. Now, to what kind of divine you have to make your offering? What is the conception of the divine? Well, I pointed out to Behim the other day some portion on yoga so as to give him a conception, an integral conception of the ultimate reality. Now, here in the words of Essays on the Gita, Sri Aurobindo is giving an idea of the being to whom this of sacrifice of action is to be offered. To the divine, to the supreme. This supreme is the divine, the highest aspect of divine personality. To him, we offer everything as a sacrifice. Into his hands we give up our actions. In his existence we live and move. Unified with him in our nature and with all existences in him, we become one soul and one power of being with him. And with all beings and with his supreme reality we identify and unite our self-being by works done as a sacrifice. Eliminating desire, we arrive at knowledge and at the soul's possession of its own self. By works done in self-knowledge and God-knowledge, we are liberated into unity, peace and joy of divine existence. So that raises the yogi or the aspirant to the higher nature, from the operation of lower nature in which actions are dictated by pressure of ignorant nature. He rises to another nature where actions are determined for him from the higher nature. The doctrine of sacrifice we read, and I dilated upon it yesterday in my exposition of the new significance or new meaning of sacrifice which Gita had given. Gita turned this sacrifice ceremony into a symbol with the way they had already done in the origin. You see, it was a symbol in the Vedic times. Then it was lost and forgotten. Well, again, when Gita came and the Upanishad came, they restored the meaning of the symbolic significance of the sacrifice. Sacrifice in its origin was not an outside ceremonial or a ritual. It was really an outer symbol of something that was to be done inside, you see. And the sacrifice was an inner process of offering oneself to the divine. But that meaning was lost. And then it retained only confined to outer ritual. And it became so rampant that Gautam Buddha had to raise his voice against it. Now here he is describing the sacrifices Gita has given in one of his chapters. He says that sacrifice and the world were created together. The human collectivity and sacrifice, the Creator created together and told the human beings that you take this sacrifice with you. Saha yagna praja srashtva puruvacha prajapati. That is the text, you see. that the Creator created the beings and sacrifice together. And then he says, Anena prasavitsyadam eshavos tushta kamaduk. By this sacrifice, you will increase. He will be the satisfier of all your desires. These are the literal translation of that verse, you see. He created men and sacrifice, collectivity of beings and sacrifice together. And told the human beings that here, you take the sacrifice with you. It will be the fulfiller of all your desires. By this you will increase. That's the thing. Now, he is commenting on that, as is in the Gita. In the movement of mutable being in nature, means mutable being is the egoistic working of lower nature. When man works under the subjection of ego, well, it's a mutable nature that is at work. All is and must be an interchange. There is always an interchange in life, imposed or voluntarily taken up. For existence is one, and its divisions must found themselves, means must be founded upon some law of mutual dependence. Otherwise, there will be complete isolation. One is divided into all. You see, and then if there is a complete separation of one from the other, then there will be no mutual, no realization of the one. Therefore, he says there must be some law of mutual dependence, each growing by each and living by all. Each is growing by each. You see, if you take human society, you will see how intertwined and impossible to avoid is this interchange. You cannot do without it. That's the basis of the law of sacrifice, you see. A compulsory interchange and growth by mutual giving. Yeah, that's the law of sacrifice is that. You give and you take. You cannot only take. It's not possible in the world. It says that the man who wants only to take is like a thief. That is in one verse of the Gita. That one in life who only wants to take and take and take is a thief. He won't get it, first of all, but if he tries, it's like a thief trying to steal. He can't succeed long. He will learn to give. He will have to be taught to give by nature. Where sacrifice is not willingly given, nature exacts it by force. And man doesn't do it well, nature exacts it. She satisfies the law of her living. A mutual giving and receiving is the law of life, without which it cannot for a moment endure. And this fact is a stamp of the divine creative will on the world. That the creative will is divine, this is a stamp that no life can live and thrive and be without interchange. Mutual giving and receiving is the law of life, without which it cannot for a moment endure. And this fact is the stamp of the divine creative will on the world. It has manifested in its own being. The universal law of sacrifice is the sign that the world is of God and belongs to God, and that life is His dominion. Life is His domain and the house of worship, and not a field for the self-satisfaction of an independent ego. Not the fulfillment of ego. That is only our crude and obscure beginning. But the discovery of God and the worship and seeking of the divine, and the infinite through constantly enlarging sacrifice, culminating in a perfect self-giving, founded on a perfect self-knowledge, is that which the experience of life is at last intended to lead. It is to this that it must lead ultimately. Well, it's time. Tomorrow, take up the Upanishad tomorrow and see. Gita we will have perhaps one time more, after some days, not now. Upanishad we can go, otherwise it will remain such a vast subject that you can never come to any end. So better to get on with some part of the Upanishad, otherwise we will never have.
There's some discussion about opening, and Aurobindo relates it at one point there in the discussion to becoming conscious of every movement in the being, every frame.
Yes.
And does this tie in with when the Purusha draws back from nature
Yes.
and watches
Like a witness, yes.
everything that's going on?
Yes. That is one part of. You see, on what plane you stand, the Purusha can stand on all planes or one plane one by one. It depends on where your consciousness is concentrated or where the circumstance is required to concentrate. If you are quiet and no call upon you from outside is at work, then you can concentrate on all this ladder of consciousness and stand on every step and watch the nature on every plane, on every step. But supposing you are in an environment or circumstance where something makes a call upon you, outside knock or shock or action is upon you, then you have to react on that plane. Then you stand on that plane chiefly, and in a detached way you look at what is happening. You understand? I give you an illustration. That's my idea of human being. You see, it's what we will call them. I say, now here is your mind. You see, here is your emotional being, and here is your vital being. Let us put it for rough, say, and this is the center of your physical being, and this is the subconscious. You see. Now, when you are quiet, then you can stand here, you can stand here, you can stand here, you can stand here, and watch out what is happening here. This is the changing nature in which thoughts, ideas, suggestions are passing here. They are really outside you. You are only watching from your station, and you catch hold of them, they remain, and then you say, this is my thought. There is no my thought. It's all passing here, you see. Thoughts are passing like that here to the mind. Emotions are passing here like that. The vital moments of desire and ambitions are passing like that here. And in the physical also the things are passing and going through the system here. But physical system, not the psychological system. To the extent one allows the physical to invade, it will invade the mind, emotion and all the beings. But otherwise only it goes to the physical sensation. Now what man does is that he holds this, whatever is passing he stops and says, this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. Then he gets disturbed and then he gets so busy with all that. But if he does not stop there, then he will get out and he simply stands on the watchtower on each and says, well, what is passing? I want to see. He is not attached or touched by what is passing. That is a status. And if at particular time, a call is made upon you here, on the mental level, then you are busy here. And all these are for the time being, well, not active, passive. You are not active on those planes, but you can become active and immediately you want to become. You see, you can immediately put yourself here. It's like a man who has got a staircase. You see 7 staircases in his great building. And he has the capacity not to have only a lift, but a presence on all the 7 floors at a time. Well, that's all. He can be present on all the 7 floors at a time. But if he is called upon on the one, well, he attends to that one particular level and is conscious of that only, mainly. Though all the others might be subconsciously operating, but he is mainly conscious of that on which he has either some response to make or some demand made upon him as a person.
Would you define that Purusha a little bit for the friends who were not here when you were telling us about? Or would you just define it as the witness self?
Yes, generally this happens to the people in the mental consciousness, because in the vital they find it very difficult to detach their the subjective self and the movement of nature, because man is strongly attached in his vital. But in the mind it becomes comparatively easy, intellectual or mental being, to separate itself from all that is happening in the mind and to see it as if it did not belong to him. To take a third man's point of view with regard to the flow of thoughts, suggestions, ideas, impulses passing in the mind. Mind is only a passage and not a creative center. These people very often forget that mind does not create anything. Mind only reflects and allows things to pass. Wherever you see even a new creation, it is passing things received by that man and put into words. Creativity is only on two levels, supermind and vital. There is no third level in human consciousness that can create. If you say creation, something that was not there is brought into being, only supermind. And here in the world, vitality, vital force, that can create. Mind is a passage, either for the vital to go and satisfy itself, or for something beyond mind to come down and assume a mental or vital form or physical form. You see? It's a double passage that way. Mind is not itself creative. And the best minds, the mind's greatest power is detachment, not activity, detachment. Then mind knows in its passivity and detachment what it would not know if it was active. In fact, that is the greatest power of mind. It is stronger than vitality because it takes a detached view which the vital being cannot take. Vital being can never disengage itself from the object of its enjoyment or desire, whereas mind can. Mind can always detach and see, the futility of any enjoyment and say, what is this enjoyment? Vital has no time to give to this sort of thing, but mind immediately can do it. And this detachment is a great power. If mind can maintain it, it can control the vital. If it is strong mind. If the vital is strong, well, the mind can remain strong, but the vital will carry it like a wild horse. But otherwise, the mind can, by a powerful detachment, give such a light of knowledge, first gain such a light of knowledge and give such a knowledge to the vital that the vital itself will hold back from a blind movement of impulse or passion or desire or ambition. This is very possible for mind to do. Mind itself can be so lighted and full of knowledge of what is at work in the vital that it can transfer this illumination to vital being and illuminate in such a way that vital itself will draw back. The vital is the dynamic part, the enjoying part, the part of movement, part of domination, part of enjoyment. You see, that is the psychological part. Well, the intellect is the part that knows, understands, comprehends. So wants to know. Vital wants to have, to hold, to enjoy. You see, that is the vital being. They are not two. They are not one. They are quite separate.
Let's just stand. When we use the term receptive mind, then we're labeling this that you were just talking about, where we're just thinking, the mind is open to these inspirational thoughts or creativity, more so than when we're emotionally involved.
I didn't quite catch your question. What is the point that you would like to elucidate?
When the mind is open and receptive to creativity, inspiration.
Yes, I understand. Yes.
Is this usually a time when we are not emotionally involved in something, in thought, just on an intellectual basis?
You see, this use of the term mind is very in English. This means it includes the whole of inner psychology very often. Mind, when they say, they include vitality also and emotional being also and so on. Mind is used very, very carelessly. Now, if therefore we want to define the now functions that are in the inner psychology, then we will have to say intellect, one, emotion, second, willpower, third. Mind has its own willpower, emotion has its own capacity to act, vital has its own vital mind, a portion of the mind which is attached to vital activity of life satisfaction impulses, but it is not pure mind. Therefore, We have discussed this in psychology when we talked about it, you see, that each function has all the others involved in it. Therefore, when we say mind, well, there is vitality in the mind also. There is a physical element in mind also. There is what we call a physical mind. Physical mind is the sense of a mind that takes only what is available to the sense as real. To that mind, if you say anything beyond sense, it will not accept real. This is physical mind. Vital mind is a mind that is given over to fulfillment of impulses and the means, methods, and knowledge of it. Pure mind is a mind that wants and seeks only the truth. It has nothing to do with satisfaction of vital impulse or physical realities only. No, it is only interested in knowing the truth. The knowledge for its own sake. That is pure mind. Now about creativity. Creativity really comes powerfully and effectively if a true effective creation is to be brought here. Mind is only a passage. The real receptive parts are emotion and vital being. The true receptivity of any creative force or creative impulse or creative, new creation, it may be that you stay in the mind. But if the mind is only mind, the creation will not be effective. It may be creation, but it has to catch hold of life if it is to be effective here. And then it must be sufficiently suffused with life force and vitality in order to be here in this world an effective power of somebody who has created something. So you study any great artistic creation and you will see that the artist has succeeded not a great intellectual feat, but has succeeded in receiving without distortion something from the world of harmony, something in the world of beauty, something in the world of aesthetics, and brought it down and held it in his vital being. And it is from the vital that he is projected into expression in life. Then, when you see the piece of art or creation, you feel this is living. That becomes living because it has taken the life from the creator and come out, you see. It must embody life. Otherwise, creation remains, lacking the solidity and the substantiality of a creation, you see. It is life that gives it substantiality and solidity. So that receptivity, mind has to be receptive in the sense that it must become passive and open to the higher truths, to the level of inspiration. It must not meddle, must not become too active. The difficulty with mind is, as soon as one ray of inspiration or intuition is received, it becomes like a monkey going roundabout at once and catches that little thing and creates something around it. It does. But that's not full creation. It is like abortion, you see. And this is training. Great artists have it by nature or by genius, by God-given gift, you see, that they remain passive till the whole thing is received. The ordinary artist, you see, as soon as one intuition comes, he gets mind says, oh, this new, this nobody has done, let me do, catches hold of it. And he becomes so active that the rest of it is held up there, it doesn't come down, because there is no room. It has become already disturbed, you see. Something was pouring down, and where it is pouring down, if it remains quiet, more and more will come down. Instead, if the thing becomes active, well, the thing stops because there is no receptivity, has disappeared by that time. Mind has already been busy. Instead of looking at what is going to come, the full shape of it, the full size of it, the complete, downpour, well, the very first little shower has disturbed it to such an extent that more it can't receive. So it gives something. Certainly, what is received is something, but it is not the full. That is the difficulty with the artistic temperament. If it is not of the first order intended by divine or nature, and if he is training, then the best training is to keep the mind completely passive throughout. That is the best way of receiving a great work of art or piece of art. It's a difficult training, not easy. Because the mind is a tendency when something new comes to be excited about it and to be busy about it, catch hold and run around it and now make something wonderful out of it. And well, it makes something, of course, but not as wonderful as it would be if the whole had been received, you see. This passivity is good. And secondly, it must be suffused with life force. It must be something which is called forth from inside, a need for giving body to a truth, to some conception of beauty, you see, or a harmony, some creation of of a thing that has not come down yet, you see, and a desire for making the world more harmonious and beautiful. Making this world more harmonious and beautiful. Well, that impulse, when it becomes very strong, it receives something from there.